My name is James. I'm 72 years old. I live in Dorchester, a forgotten corner of Boston, and I've been through a lot in this life. But nothing compares to the day a hospital director looked at me like I was trash and froze when he saw what I took from my old bag. Tell me something. Why is it that those who clean the floor are always treated as if they know nothing about life? Does worn clothes make people think that we also have a worn-out soul? I spent more than 40 years cleaning rooms where the masters of the world decided the fate of others. And even there, hearing everything, being invisible, I never stopped paying attention. This story you're going to hear isn't about anger, it's about love. About what a simple man without a diploma, without a tie, but with memory and courage, was able to do to try to save the daughter he raised alone. How far I've gone, and what happened when contempt turned to silence. By the end of this video, you'll understand that sometimes those who are ignored for decades, you can change everything with just one gesture. It's a shabby bag. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. That man in a tie, director of the most expensive hospital in Boston, looked at me with contempt as if he were seeing a garbage bag out of place. And a few minutes later, in front of everyone, her smile was erased when I opened my canvas bag and placed on the white marble counter a thick envelope, heavy, stuffed with $100 bills. The sound that those ballots made when they touched the counter silenced the entire reception. Everyone stopped. Everyone looked at me. Even the air seemed to get denser at that moment. But to understand how I got there and what led me to do what I did, I need to go back in time a little. Now, if you've ever felt what it's like to be judged by your appearance, if you have ever been treated as invisible even though you have given your all, I invite you to stay here with me. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, not as a favor, but as a sign that you also believe that every human being has value, even when the whole world insists on saying otherwise. This story is for people who carry dignity in their hands, even when they are calloused. And it starts now. I live in a simple house in Dorchester, a remote neighborhood, one of those where the bus takes time, but life goes the same way. Everyone knows each other, and the sidewalks have more cracks than a politician's promise. It was there that I lived with my wife for almost 40 years, and after she left 12 years ago, the house got bigger and emptier. But there was a light that never left me. Emily. She came into my life at the age of 8, the daughter of the neighbor across the street, a girl lost in drugs who left one night and never returned. When the social worker showed up with paperwork and a shelter recommendation, I said, "This girl already has a place to stay, and you don't have to go anywhere." From then on, she became my girl. I raised her in my own way, with rice, beans, firmness, and affection. I taught them how to make strong coffee, to look them in the eye, and to never bow my head to anyone, even when life pushes them. Nothing was ever missing, even when I only had the basics. I worked as a cleaner all my life. I spent whole nights cleaning medical clinics, luxurious offices, including St. Gregory, there in Back Bay. It was the hospital of the rich. Polished marble floor, elevator that talked, smell of imported perfume. As I moped the floor, I listened to the doctors discussing surgeries that cost the price of a house. Sometimes they forgot the open doors, and I heard everything, but no one saw me. There I was, just the man with the bucket and the broom. And you know what hurt the most? It's just that over time you get used to being ignored. They passed me in a hurry, holding clipboards, laughing among themselves. They never asked my name, but I knew all their names. Years and years of listening, seeing, cleaning the traces they left. And it was there in that hospital that I began to understand how the world works and who it works for. When I retired, I thought I was going to rest. But Emily's diagnosis came. It started with severe headaches, loss of balance. I thought it was stress, lack of vitamins, until one day she fainted in the kitchen. We rushed to the public hospital. They did the exams, an MRI, and then they called us in a small room with peeling walls and a sizzling television. The doctor said it was a brain tumor, Glioblastoma multiforme, with these words that sound more like a sentence than a diagnosis. The surgery was urgent, but she got in line. Q. That word hurt me more than the diagnosis itself. They said it was necessary to wait. Patients in more serious condition are prioritized, I asked. More serious than a tumor growing in the head of a 27-year-old girl? He shrugged. There was a lack of vacancies, a lack of staff, a lack of equipment. There was just no lack of coldness. Every week, it got worse. There were days when I couldn't stand up. Others forgot the names of things. And yet she would look at me and say, "Dad, it's going to be okay, I trust." But I felt my heart break into pieces because inside, I didn't know what else to do. You know, there's one thing that no one talks about old age. It's not the body that hurts the most, it's the silence. The silence of someone who has screamed all his life in silence, of those who gave everything and now find themselves with no way out. Moment of reflection. It's hard to explain what it feels like when the person you love more than anything is being swallowed up by the slowness of a system that never saw you. It gives a quiet anger, a deep sadness, and sometimes a thread of hope insists on staying lit. I know I'm not the only one feeling this. If you've ever been through something like this, comments below. He writes, "I believe," or "I've lived it." Let's show that the pain of being ignored. It's not invisible to everyone good. It was one night that same bag that accompanied me for years of cleaning, carrying products, lunchbox and silence. And that's where the idea came from. If I spent years cleaning the floor of that hospital, why not go back there now? Only this time not with a squeegee and cloth, but with everything I learned by listening quietly. What can an invisible cleaner do when he decides to be noticed? And how do the owners of power react? When do we stop lowering our heads? Right, you will see in the next part. And I assure you no one there was prepared, much less that doctor. The fourth time they took Emily to the Boston General, the doctor entered the room without looking us in the eye. She had a clipboard and the tired face of someone who has seen a lot of pain, but seemed to have forgotten how moved she is by it. She said that there was still no forecast for surgery, that her case was in the queue, but there were more unstable patients at the moment. Emily, her eyes sunken and her voice weak, thanked her just as much, polite as she always was. I stood there, trying to understand how a 27-year-old girl with a tumor growing in her brain could be considered stable enough to keep waiting. On the way back, she had another seizure on the bus. People looked, but no one helped. Just me, holding her head in my lap as I trembled all over. When we got home, she wanted to take a shower by herself, she insisted. Meanwhile, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. I cried like a child, without noise, so she wouldn't hear. Sitting on the cold floor, I hugged my legs and felt like the most useless man in the world. I'd spent my whole life cleaning up other people's dirt, and now I couldn't wipe away my own daughter's pain. And it was on that same day, returning from the pharmacy to get a medicine that barely had an effect, that I passed in front of St. Gregory. The hospital looked like a jewel nestled in Boston's wealthiest neighborhood. Glass facade, valet at the door, people in suits coming and going with hurried steps. I stood across the street, watching. No one there would recognize me anymore. It had been about 8 years since I had set foot there, since I retired, but inside, nothing had changed. It was the same marble floor that I waxed with special wax, the same reception with expensive flower arrangements, the same air conditioning too cold. I remembered the nights when I would scrub the floor while listening to the doctors talk out loud, counting cases, laughing at patients as if they were numbers. And there, at that moment, standing on the sidewalk, a thought hit me that I didn't want to have. Could it be that there, in that place where I was invisible for so long, was Emily's only chance to survive? I went home, dropped the bag from the pharmacy on the table and sat down. I kept looking at my bag, the same one, made of bluish canvas, that accompanied me for 37 years. I used it so much that it already looked like an extension of my arm. From inside, I took out an old envelope. In it were the statements of the shares I had bought in the 80s, when no one noticed me, but I heard everything. I remembered one particular night when two doctors were discussing a pharmaceutical company called New Med Inc., which was going public and promised to grow fast. While they laughed and bet among themselves, I was writing everything down in my mind. And when the bank opened on Monday, I went there and bought what I could. Little, $20, $30 a month. I did this for years. Nobody knew, not even my wife knew. But over the decades, that money grew, and it grew a lot. But I never touched it. It was my safety plan, my if everything goes wrong. And now, everything had gone wrong. I closed the envelope, hugged the bag to my chest and whispered, "It's now." But deep down, I still didn't know if I had the courage, because it's one thing to clean the floor of a hospital. It's quite another to walk through the front door, look the director in the eye and say, "You're going to operate on my daughter." I knew they were going to look at me with disdain. I knew they would laugh, that they would ask how much money I thought a surgery like that cost. And I knew that, even though I had the value, it wouldn't be enough to buy respect, because respect in places like that you can't buy with money. He is conquered with something that few there had, truth. And that's where the story starts to turn, because in that same hospital many years ago, I heard a secret, something they didn't expect a cleaner to hear. And when I remembered that, I understood that the tables could turn. But how can I make a powerful hospital director shut up in the face of a man like me? And what exactly was I about to reveal? You will understand in the next part. That morning the sky was overcast, a dirty grey that matched the weight on my chest. I woke up before the sun rose. I made black, strong coffee, the kind that scratches your throat and forces you to stay awake, even when your body begs for a few more minutes in bed. Emily was still asleep. She was so weak that she didn't even feel it when I adjusted the blanket to her neck. Before leaving, I left a note on the fridge. "I'll be back soon. Trust your father." The neighbor next door, Mrs. Hilda, offered to keep an eye on her. Emily liked her. She said she looked like the grandmother she never had. I grabbed my bag, the blue canvas one with the zipper half broken, and went to the parade. The first bus took a long time. The second came packed. The third one that took me to Back Bay looked like a capsule from another planet. Air conditioning on the stalk, people with laptops on their laps, expensive watches, white sneakers without stains. And there I was, with my shabby coat, holding on tight to the strap, trying not to think too much about what I was about to do. But every corner of that part of the city reminded me of something. It was like walking inside my own memories. There, on that street, I had coffee with the security guards. There, on that corner, a doctor scolded me because the floor was too wet. And there, right there, I fell and sprained my knee. I worked in pain for 3 weeks, and no one asked how I was doing. When I got off the bus and looked at the facade of St. Gregory, I felt a lump in my throat. The building gleamed. Everything seemed clean, bright, immaculate. But I knew what was underneath all that marble. I knew the words that flowed between one appointment and another. He knew how much indifference he could fit into a white coat. I crossed the street with a slow pace, feeling the cold of the wind enter through the holes in my shoe. I entered through the revolving door and went straight to the reception. They had changed everything. The countertop was now black granite. The receptionist, a white girl, hair tied up, impeccable makeup, wore a badge hanging from her chest as if it were a medal. She didn't even look at me properly. He just said, without taking his eyes off the computer, "Good morning, sir. What are you looking for here?" I took a deep breath. "I need to talk to the clinical director." She looked up, scanned my old cap, my shabby coat, and forced a smile. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I need to talk to him. It is urgent." She let out a giggle, but soon disguised it. "This is a private clinic, sir. We only serve by appointment and, well, with medical indication. I won't be long. I just want 5 minutes with him. Have you lost your way? Maybe you're looking for the Boston General. It's a few blocks from here." She said this in a polite tone, but full of venom, as if to say, "You don't belong here." I knew that tone. I listened for decades, from customers, doctors, visitors. I just looked at her, firm. My name is James. I worked here for more than 30 years. I just want to talk to Dr. Ronald Whitaker." The name seemed to cut the air. She hesitated. He looked to the side, fiddled with the phone. "Just a moment." I waited. Minutes later, she got up in a hurry and whispered something to a colleague. When he returned, he said, "Dr. Whitaker is busy. He is the CEO of the institution, you know. He doesn't usually answer, well, unexpected visits." Before she finished the sentence, I saw him passing by. Tall, grey hair, lined suit. He had 2 doctors by his side, talking and gesticulating with an arrogance that could be felt from afar. The same man I saw pass me by without ever looking me in the eye. He was going to the administrative wing. At the time, I got up. The girl at the reception stretched out her arm, but I didn't get to push her. I just walked towards him, the heart racing, sweating hands inside his pocket. When he saw me coming, he frowned. "Right?" he said, already impatiently in his voice. I stopped right in front of him. I looked him in the eye and said, "Dr. Whitaker, I need your help. My daughter needs urgent brain surgery. I know that you have the equipment here, the team, and I also know that you have the power to decide." He measured me from top to bottom. The 2 doctors next to him crossed their arms. The receptionist approached, her face pale. He stepped forward. "Do you have health insurance?" "No." "Is there a referral?" "Not either." "So, unfortunately, you are in the wrong place. This is not a community clinic." I remained firm. "I know what this place is. I cleaned it for 37 years, and I know you know me." He was silent. The name James seemed to poke at some memory in him. "Ah, the janitor," murmured, and he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was one of those that hurts, that opens up contempt. "I do remember. What have you retired? About 8 years? Well, I hope you're doing well. But unfortunately, that doesn't change the protocol of the house." And turned his back. At this moment, I knew. Respect would not come with words, nor with memories. I was going to have to show it. But how to make a man like that listen? Without screaming? How to force power to sit in front of someone it has always pretended not to see? In the next part, you'll see exactly what I took out of the bag, and why that hospital was never the same after that day. I stood there, cap in hand, as I watched Dr. Whitaker approach with that way of someone who only listens to what he wants to hear. The receptionist whispered something in his ear, and he arched his eyebrow. "This gentleman wants free surgery," she said, in the most mocking way I've ever heard in my life. At the time, one of the doctors behind him chuckled, the kind that doesn't come out high but cuts deep. I breathed slowly and said, "My daughter needs an urgent craniotomy. She has an advanced glioblastoma. You're already losing your senses, and I know you can do this surgery here." They looked at each other. Whitaker craned his neck, measuring me as if he were facing a madman. "Sir, do you have any idea of the cost of a craniotomy? We're talking about, what? $350,000, depending on the complexity. Not to mention the daily rates, medication, and the post-operative period. Do you think this falls from the sky?" Another doctor blurted out. "Maybe he thinks it's Black Friday." Laughter. Low, but there, on my face. And each of those laughs felt like a slap in my memories, because I knew those corridors, those walls. I had spent more than 30 winters cleaning the floor of that place. I saw doctors start as interns. I saw rich patients being carried in their arms. I saw flowers exchanged at receptions while the blood was still drying on the floor. And yet, even after all, they still saw me as someone who was in the wrong place. The director stepped forward, folded his arms and said, "Maybe you can get something in a community clinic. I believe Boston Free Health still does resonance in extreme cases. But here, well, here the queue is, for those who can afford it." And he turned his back, a dry, automatic movement, as if the conversation was already over. But there, at that moment, it was my silence that spoke louder. I didn't say anything else. I just lowered my head, and I started to open the bag. I took out a thick brown envelope from inside her. The same envelope where I kept for years the statements of my shares, old bills, money that I had saved over time. And I calmly placed it on the counter. It was at that moment that the environment changed. The receptionist stopped. The laughter stopped. The sound of the envelope touching the marble sounded louder than any words. Whitaker turned his face away, puzzled. I pushed the envelope to the edge of the countertop. Here, there is the equivalent of $350,000. Liquid. You can check. I already transferred the rest yesterday. Do you still think I'm in the wrong place? He was speechless for a moment. His hand hovered over the envelope, but it didn't touch. The other doctors, who had previously laughed, now exchanged uncomfortable looks. Nobody expected this. And there, in that minute, I saw it in his eyes. It was not respect. It was fear, because that envelope wasn't just money. It was a wide-open question. What now? What are you going to do when the man you ignored shows up with more power than you expected? I'm here opening my heart, telling my story. If you're listening, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, because I still have a lot of things saved to tell you, because this story, it's not over yet. Money silenced the hall, yes, but what came next? That's what really stopped that hospital. Can you imagine what happens when a cleaner starts saying things that doctors prefer to hide? That's that. In the next part, I open my mouth, and no one there will forget what they heard. As he stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb about to explode, I remained silent. The silence hurt more than screaming, but it wasn't an empty silence, no. He was one of those loaded with memories. Memory of every night I cleaned Doctor Whitaker's lab on the 3rd floor, when he was still just a new resident, full of twinkle in his eye and thirst for recognition. I remember it well. He stayed up late reviewing reports, scribbling articles he dreamed of publishing, pacing back and forth with a mug of coffee in his hand and his eyes red from reading. He spoke to himself at times, as if he were practicing speeches for an imaginary audience, and I, with my broom, swept the floor and listened to everything. Most of the words went right through me, but there was one night in particular that never left my head. It was winter. It must have been almost midnight. He had printed some pages and was reading aloud, correcting his own sentences. It was called Class Biases in Medical Diagnosis. That caught my attention at the time. I stood near the door, cleaning slowly. He said indignantly that poor patients took longer to receive a diagnosis, that the doctors looked differently at those who arrived with simple clothes, that the waiting time increased depending on the address in the registration, that American medicine was faster for those who had a surname and slower for those who only had pain, and more, that the system knew this and pretended not to see it. That text, he was brave. He himself said in a loud voice, "If I publish this now, I will burn my name before I even go up." I understood. And I also understood that he didn't have the courage. He never published. The thesis disappeared, but I never forgot. I recorded the title, I recorded the sentences, and I recorded the cowardice, because he knew the truth and chose silence. And there I was, years later, putting money on the counter to save my daughter, and being treated like a beggar. When he looked at me again, trying to regain control of the situation, he said ironically, "And how do you think we are going to pay anesthesiologists, surgeons, support staff, post-operative bed, huh? Did you bring a miracle inside this old bag?" I looked him in the eye. He doesn't smile. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "I brought more than that." And I opened the bag. I took out a bundle of papers, some old copies already yellowed by time, and a folded sheet with my name written on top of it, a handwritten summary with excerpts from the thesis he shelved. He turned pale. He recognized it right away. This is not public. Where did you get that?" "I was there, Doctor, when you were still a man who believed in justice." He didn't know what to answer. The other doctors, now restless, looked at him, waiting for an explanation. The receptionist pretended to type, but did not take her eyes off the scene. I put the sheets away carefully, like someone who holds a loaded gun. "If you say no, I understand, but I'm going to leave this envelope here, and also these pages." I made mention of leaving. He held me by the arm. "Wait. For the first time, the tone changed. It was no longer arrogance. It was fear and a bit of shame. The man who had ignored me for decades now whispered, "Do you want blackmail? Is that it?" I shook my head. "I want a chance for her. Is that it? But if you don't give it, then perhaps the world needs to read what you never had the courage to publish." He was speechless. Time seemed to have stopped. And at that moment I realized that man was no longer sure of anything, and for the first time, he had control of the room. But what would he do? Would you accept my request, or would you use your power to shut me up? In the next part, you will see that even the masters of the world tremble when the truth knocks on the door with humility and a battered bag. With my bag open before me, I slowly pulled out the first wad of bills. $100 bills rolled tight, each bundle wrapped in a worn rubber band. The noise he made when he touched the counter was dry, real. Then I took another one, and another. One by one, with the same calmness that I used all my life not to stumble over pride. The entire reception fell silent. The bundles were spread over the white marble as if it were a rain of memories. $327,000 arranged with precision. Clean money. Each note there had a story, a night at work, a cold dawn cleaning vomit from a rich patient, cleaning birth blood that no one wanted to see. When I put on the last packet, I looked up. Dr. Whitaker had no more color on his face. The other doctors, who had been so talkative before, now looked at the floor, the ceiling, anywhere they didn't have to face shame. The receptionist typed fast, as if pretending to be busy, but her fingers trembled. "I worked for 40 years, I said in a calm tone, "and while you were talking about pharmaceutical stocks and bets, I listened, and he invested what he could, little by little, with patience. Today, this money is for my daughter. She has a brain tumor, and this hospital can save her." Silence. Those words were not shouting, they were not threats. They were truths placed naked on the counter. "How much does the surgery cost?" I asked, looking at Dr. Whitaker as if he were just an ordinary man. No title, no suit, no power. He tried to answer, but his voice failed. I don't know if we can—" "Of course you can," I said, without raising my voice. "You are the director. I know who holds the key to the decision here. The question is not whether they can, it's if they want to." At that point, I saw in their eyes something that wasn't just shame. It was fear. Fear that someone like me, someone they thought would never get past the service door, would be right there in the center of the front desk, breaking the entire script of that place. And look, if you've come this far with me, pay attention. The strongest of this story hasn't even happened yet. I'm just starting to show what dignity is kept in silence. Stay with me until the end, because you will understand that sometimes life changes not with shouting, but with restrained courage. Dr. Whitaker cleared his throat, adjusted his tie. "All this, is it really in your name?" he asked, with a certain contempt, trying to get back to the surface. I just took out of my pocket a bank statement with a recent stamp. I placed it next to the bundles. "If you want, you can call the bank. They confirm it." He picked up the paper with hesitant fingers. He looked at it, sighed, he looked around. The doctors were still there, watching without the courage to move, and it was at that moment that he realized that he was alone, that the power he thought he controlled was not enough to escape the truth I brought. "You want us to schedule the surgery, is that it?" he asked, trying to regain control. "No. I want the surgery to happen before my daughter can no longer recognize my face." The weight of the sentence hit deeply. I saw it. He hit him, he hit the others, he even hit the receptionist who stopped typing. The room was mute, and there, with my bag empty and my heart pounding, I realized that time had turned. The question now was another. What would they do when they understood that who they humiliated? Was he the one who knew the corridors of that institution the most? In the next part, you will find out what money buys surgery. But silence is well used. That buys justice. And justice. Oh, this one, they weren't used to delivering. As Dr. Whitaker's eyes scanned the extracts and bundles on the counter, I continued to stand. firm, but not aggressive, just standing, like someone who has carried dignity on his back for so long that he no longer feels the weight. I knew he was still trying to understand what was going on. In his mind, a janitor didn't know how to talk like that. A cleaner didn't know how to invest in stocks. A janitor couldn't show up with $300,000 inside a torn canvas bag. But what he didn't know, it's just that I spent years listening to what he said when I thought no one was listening. "I've learned to listen, doctor," I said, breaking the silence. "More than scrubbing floors, my job has always been to pay attention. While you were discussing profits, surveys, and company names, I was there, writing with his head, quietly, a NewMed Inc. And I heard that name in 1987 at an end-of-shift meeting that you yourself conducted." He stared at me, motionless. "You laughed with your colleagues. They said that the paper was going to skyrocket, that those who entered early would fill their pockets. Well, I entered, slowly, with the little he had, but I entered, and I stayed. I reinvested every penny. While you laughed at the cleaning, I studied the swings you left in the trash cans." The receptionist next door swallowed. One of the doctors, the one who laughed first, was now looking out the window as if he wanted to disappear. The world thinks that those who clean don't think, that those who carry buckets do not observe. But I saw it. I heard it. And now I'm here. Whitaker crossed his arms. He tried to regain his posture, but the sweat on his forehead gave it away. "I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. I don't want revenge. I want justice. Mrs. Emily Jameson will have surgery tomorrow. And if it is not, this hospital will be in the newspapers. I have the right contacts, people who heard my story, people who don't need a position to have a voice, and people who will love to know that one of the largest hospitals in Boston denied help to a patient in serious condition, even with everything paid for." He opened his mouth to answer, but I raised my hand. "And one more thing. If you try to deny it, I publish what I have of that thesis. The one that you shelved for fear of losing prestige. You know what I'm talking about." His face turned red. His eyes dropped. For the first time, he had no response. At that moment, I stopped for a second. I looked at everyone there, and I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for knowing that I had to do all that to be heard, and relief, knowing that my daughter had, at last, a real chance. "Allow me to open a space here just a moment. You are the one listening to this story. Have you ever felt like you had to yell twice as much just to be treated with half the respect? Have you ever had to prove that you were worthy when everyone already looked at you as if you weren't? If so, write it down here. Leave a "I know how it is" or a "I understand you," because that kind of pain, it should not be felt alone. After that moment, Whitaker took a deep breath. He looked at his colleagues and said, "Book the surgery. Tomorrow." And he walked away fast, as if fleeing from himself. I stayed there for a while longer, looking at that counter that I waxed myself years ago. Now my papers, my money, and my history were there, not as dirt to be swept away, but as proof that no one is invisible forever. But what I didn't know, it was not yet the end. The surgery was going to happen, yes, but what came after it? It messed with the whole structure of that place, and with the heart of everyone who still thought that only the rich deserved to be saved. He tried to hold the pose, but I could see it. The sweat on the temples, the stiff neck, the short breath. Dr. Whitaker, the same man who for so many years had walked with his chin held high in the halls as I swept the floor behind him, now seemed small in my presence. He turned to the receptionist with a hurried gesture. "Call Dr. Patel and Dr. Silva. I want the neurosurgery team to be together now." The girl nodded, her fingers still trembling on the keyboard. The entire lobby was mute. I felt the looks coming from all corners, from other doctors, from patients waiting for an appointment, even from security at the door, but no one dared to interrupt. That morning, the man washing toilets was giving orders, and no one questioned it. "I want a formal contract, in writing, with the signature of the gentleman and the hospital. No verbal promises." I said this looking straight at him. The procedure will be at 7 in the morning, resonance still today, hospitalization still today, and that she is treated with the same respect as any other patient here." He nodded dryly, without the courage to stare my eyes for a long time. "It will be done." "Great." I collected my bag, now lighter, emptied of money, but full of dignity. "I'm going to pick up my daughter. She will sleep today under a secure roof, and tomorrow you'll wake up with hope." I didn't thank him. It was not gratitude that fit at that moment. It was justice. Those who thank are those who receive favors, and I didn't receive any favors. I paid, with sweat, with silence, with attentive listening for decades. What I got there has been conquered. I turned my back and walked towards the main door. No one tried to stop me. No one said a word. They only watched me, maybe trying to understand how it all happened. Perhaps rethinking how many times they had already stepped over someone thinking they would never be charged. I walked out of the glass door with a calm step. I felt the March cold hit my face, but inside me, the heart was warm. I took the subway back. I sat on the bench next to the window and hugged my bag. I no longer had the weight of wads of money, but I had the value of a lifetime. And now, more than ever, it also had the weight of victory. As the train swayed, I watched the city go by the window. The streets, the buildings, the people in a hurry. How many of them carry stories like mine? How many were silenced, ignored, stepped on? But do they remain firm, with dignity in their pockets? I smiled, for the first time in days. It wasn't a smile of silly joy. It was a smile of relief, to know that I hadn't lost my little girl, to know that no matter how much the world tries to silence the invisible, one day the voice of truth finds its way, and there are still those who say that we have no power, that poor people have no choice, that those who clean the floor will never raise their heads. But I tell you, no one knows better what is behind a structure than the one who cleans its corners, and on that day, they understood that. But as the train followed, and I was already thinking about picking up Emily, a restlessness grew in my chest. Because, as every parent knows, the fight does not end when the door opens. It just changes shape. And what was waiting for me in the hospital, next to her bed, it wasn't just hope. It was a new challenge, because not everything inside was as resolved as it seemed. And when her eyes opened and she whispered a word I didn't expect to hear, I knew that the real test was yet to come. I got home in the late afternoon. The streets of Dorchester were emptier than usual. The wind cut through the corners hard, and the branches of the trees scraped the lampposts with a sound that only made the silence of the neighborhood seem deeper. I opened the door slowly. Emily was on the couch, wrapped in the blanket her mother made when she was still alive. She was pale, too thin, but when she saw me enter, smiled. That tired smile she kept just for me. I moved closer, sat slowly next to her, and held her cold hand. She squeezed back, weak but firm. "Dad, you're different. What happened?" I looked deep into her eyes and just said, "Tomorrow, you're going to have surgery at St. Gregory at 7 in the morning." She blinked a few times as if she didn't understand at first. Then the tear came on its own. It wasn't crying in pain. It was a relief, of hope. She didn't ask how. She just nodded her head and said, "Thank you for never giving up on me." Later, while she was sleeping, I went to the bedroom. I took the cleanest clothes I had out of the closet. White button-down shirt, which I wore to her mother's funeral. Fabric pants that were almost too loose. Polished shoes, which I polished even though I had nowhere to go. I put everything folded on top of the chair. Then I took the folder with the medical documents, resonance, report, surgical protocol. I recalled each step. I sat on the edge of the bed and stood there just taking a deep breath. The clock seemed to stop. The house, too quiet. Just the noise of the wind outside. That's when I looked at the nightstand and saw the picture frame, the photo of my wife, smiling on any given Sunday, with little Emily on her lap. I took the frame in my hands, ran my finger carefully through the glass. "You would have been proud of her, and maybe from me too," I murmured. "But today, I need you to give me strength, just one more time. I was like that for a while. The time the heart needed to understand that the next day everything could change. It was close to midnight when I heard Emily's faint voice coming from the kitchen. I got up and went there. She was standing, leaning against the sink, wrapped in the blanket, barefoot on the icy floor. "Dad, pray with me." That caught me in a way that I can't explain. She knew, felt, and even so weak, she wanted to kneel with me. We knelt side by side in the same corner of the kitchen where we had so often asked for help. But that night, it was different. We do not ask for a miracle. Thank for the opportunity, for courage, on the road here. Her hands were cold, but faith hot. The prayer was simple, with cut words, long pauses. But there, on that hard floor, I understood that no matter how much the world pushes you down, if you have anywhere to look when you close your eyes, you're never alone. And allow me to open my heart with you who are listening to me. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. Because what we live, when it is shared with truth, can turn on light in places that no one else can reach. Emily went back to the couch afterwards. I stayed in the kitchen for a while longer, sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. Neither sleep nor hunger, just thought. It was the eve of the surgery, and everything could work out, or everything could slip through his fingers. But deep down, I felt it. There was something that was not yet right, something I hadn't realized, a detail, a loose piece. And the next day, it was going to come to light. What was still hidden behind those cold corridors of St. Gregory? And why, even after everything, did I still feel that the fight wasn't over? We woke up early. Long before the sun touched the windows of Dorchester, I was already ready when Emily opened her eyes. She smiled the way only she knew how to smile, like someone who is tired, but still believes. I prepared some weak tea, helped her get dressed slowly, and we left. The taxi passed in front of the point where, for more than 20 years, I waited for the bus with my crumpled lunchbox and my thick rubber gloves. But this time, we went to that hospital in a different way, through the front door, and with his name marked on the list. When the car stopped at St. Gregory, it was 6:15 a.m. The day was still grey. Boston was sleeping, but that hospital was already boiling inside. And there, at the entrance, standing inside the revolving door, he was, Dr. Whitaker, alone, no tie, without that starched suit, only with the lab coat, and a look that, I swear on everything, I didn't carry any more contempt. He carried something that if it wasn't an excuse, at least it was respect. He came to the door, opened it with his own hands, and said only, "Good morning, Mr. James. The team is ready. Everything will be fine." Emily looked at me surprised. I nodded, and we went inside. 2 nurses came with the wheelchair, that modern type, with a comfortable backrest, nothing like those of a public hospital. One of them held a clipboard, but spoke kindly. "Emily Jameson, room 304, surgical ward. Everything prepared." She sat down slowly, still weak, but with another energy on her face, and I followed by her side like an old bodyguard, silent, but now, at last, seen. What struck me the most was the way to the elevator. Those long corridors with waxed floors and light walls, which I used to clean with a brush in hand, were different. It wasn't just the smell. It was the way people looked at it. Employees who had laughed at my presence days before now avoided my eyes. Some lowered their heads, others stammered, "Good luck, sir," without raising their tone. And there was a moment, there on the corner of Corridor C, when a girl at the reception, the same one from the "Did you get lost?" looked at me, opened her mouth as if she were going to say something, and swallowed. Her silence was louder than any apology. I walked next to Emily's chair and remembered how many times I passed by pushing buckets, my back hurting and my badge hanging from my waist. Today I walked like a father, as someone who, even without a degree, had overcome the system with courage and patience. And if you've been following me here, let me tell you something that I feel deep in my chest. Sometimes the world seems too closed for those who don't have a voice, but a truth charged with faith and constancy is capable of opening any door. And look, the strongest moment of this story is yet to come. Stay with me. We went up to the 3rd floor, surgical wing. The team was already there. White coats, blue caps, machines on. You're all set. The head nurse held out a form to me. We just need your signature here, Mr. James, as a legal guardian. I signed it, slowly, like who puts not only the name there, but the whole story that brought us to this moment. Emily held my hand. Dad, everything will be fine. I feel it. I swallowed the emotion. I couldn't weaken now. Yes, you will, my daughter. And when you wake up, the world is already going to be different. They took her carefully. I stood there in the hallway, watching the stretcher disappear behind the double door, and for a second, silence embraced me again. But it was not the silence of humiliation. It was another, a respectful silence of conquest. I knew that inside, my daughter was going to be treated with dignity, and that for the first time in his life, no one was going to sweep our history under the rug. But what I didn't expect, it was what would come after the surgery, because the deepest wound in that hospital was not in my daughter's body. It was in the conscience of who was in charge in there. And when the scalpel cut, it wasn't just a tumor that came out. It was a secret too, and the world wasn't ready to hear what came to light. The surgery began at 7:03 a.m. I remember it accurately because I heard the sound of the clock on the wall marking the time right at the time they took my daughter. The dry sound of the jumping pointer gave me a shiver in my arm. It was as if time ceased to be time and became waiting. I remained seated in that room with my hands clasped in my lap. I didn't pray with words. Not at that moment. I prayed with my body, with the posture, with silence. I prayed with the weight of the back that carried a world without ever complaining. The whole world was silent inside me. There was only that, my daughter behind a thick door, and me here, firm like a pillar that cannot fall. Inside, they later said, Dr. Whitaker led the procedure with a focus no one had seen before. An experienced, renowned doctor who has operated on dozens of brains, but who that morning, he trembled a little more as he held the scalpel. And I know why, because the words I said to him were recorded. You're not cutting a tumor, it's giving back a life. Those words, launched without anger, without shouting, but with the firmness of a father. They accompanied him during every inch opened, every vessel avoided, every suture made with fingers that, for the first time, seemed to touch more than flesh. It was 4 hours, long, eternal. The coffee I was offered cooled without being touched. The newspaper they left next to it didn't even come out of the plastic. The hard bench was not even felt. I was there, but it was as if my spirit was inside that operating room, holding hands with her, saying in her ear that everything was going to pass. And it's funny how there are memories that stick in our souls. To this day, when I close my eyes, I see myself sitting there. I see the cold light of the waiting room. The clock stopped at the same numbers, and the muffled sound of nurses' footsteps going back and forth in the hallway. Sometimes we live scenes that stick to us as if time was afraid to let it slip away. Tell me, have you ever had a moment like this? An instant that was stuck in your chest like an old photograph? If you do, share it with me in the comments. Sometimes sharing memory is like opening a window inside the soul, and I'm here to listen too. It was after 11 o'clock when the door opened. The heart came in the throat. Dr. Whitaker appeared with his mask down on his chin, his eyes marked with fatigue, but there was something more there, a strange peace. He walked up to me and said, "The surgery was a success, Mr. James. She's in recovery. In a few hours you'll wake up." I just closed my eyes for a moment. I didn't cry. He doesn't smile. I just took a deep breath like someone who returns the air after a long time trapped underwater. He added, "She's strong, and I learned a lot today. Thank you." I didn't answer. I just shook his hand for the first time as equals. Emily was taken to room 312 recovery ward. I still couldn't see her. I waited outside, sitting, my eyes fixed on the sign with the door number, a crooked 3, a 1 half erased, and a scratched 2 as if someone had passed by in anger. I found myself facing it as if it were a code, as if each number told me a part of our history, and inside, I felt it. Something was cured, but something was still not right. And that feeling didn't leave me alone, because even with the tumor removed, there was something else hidden, and it was in the hospital, not in my daughter's body, and I was about to find out what it was. The nurse left first, adjusting her mask and trying to hide her teary eyes. She saw me there, standing in the same place since early in the morning, and just said, "She's fine." "Very well." I couldn't answer. Minutes later, Dr. Whitaker followed, his lab coat still stained with sweat. The red, tired eyes, but alive. He stopped in front of me, took a deep breath, and said in a low voice, "Tumor successfully removed. No neurological damage. It was delicate, but we did it." I closed my eyes for a moment, let the body feel the news before the mind. When I opened it, I didn't feel euphoric, nor did I want to celebrate. I just said, "Thank you for doing what was right." He nodded, and in that gesture, there was more truth than in any diploma hanging on the wall. It took another 3 hours to allow entry to the room. The clock was 3:22 p.m. when they called me. I entered slowly. The room was bright, quiet, smelled of disinfectant and hope. Emily was there, lying down, her head bandaged and her eyes half closed. There was a machine next to it, blowing a low whistle and a thin tube attached to her arm. I approached slowly, pulled the chair and held his hand. It was lukewarm. Hooray. When she opened her eyes and saw me, she smiled. It was a small but whole smile. "Dad," she whispered hoarsely. I leaned closer. "Did we win?" I swallowed, tried to smile back, but the excitement came first. "Not yet, my daughter, but you're already running in my heart." She closed her eyes, but the tear flowed, silent, and I dropped mine too, because at that moment, nothing needed to be said. We understood each other just by touching. The nurse who was adjusting the IV turned discreetly, trying to hold back her tears. I noticed. And you know, there I understood something that I have never forgotten. There are victories that do not make noise, that have no fireworks or flag, but leave a trail of light so strong that those who pass by feel it. And in that room, 312, victory lived there. Between the dripping serum, the white sheet, and her hand squeezing mine, I stayed there the rest of the afternoon and part of the night. I didn't even go out to eat, not even to drink water. I just watched her sleep, the chest rising and falling slowly, as if each breath was a new page of our history being written. His head was still wrapped in bandages, his face pale but alive, and I knew deep in my soul that nothing else mattered. Everything I needed, it was there, but that strange feeling, that discomfort that started the day before, didn't leave me alone. It was like a buzzing sound in the back of consciousness. Something there was still not right, and I didn't know what, still. But I was going to find out, because when a father's heart senses, believe me, something is coming, and it did. In the days following the surgery, while Emily recovered at a slow but steady pace, I remained there in the hospital. Sometimes he slept sitting in the hard chair in his room, sometimes in the hallway. There were people who asked if I didn't want to go home to rest a little, but I just shook my head. My house is here, until she walks again. Daddy, and it was there, in this silent coming and going, that something strange began to happen. First it was a young blonde nurse who brought me a coffee without me asking. He said he had heard about me, that he thought what I did for my daughter was beautiful. The next day, a new doctor stopped me in the hallway, a little embarrassed, with the clipboard in his hand. "Mr. James, would you have a minute? I just wanted to hear a little more from you. What do you think is missing in our training?" That took me by surprise, not out of disrespect, but because it was the first time that someone with a degree wanted to listen to a man in overalls. On the third day, I went to the cafeteria to get a tray, and 3 patients greeted me. One of them, a man in a threadbare suit, lifted his hat and said, "You're Emily's father, aren't you? What courage, huh? What a lesson. I was left with no answer. Sitting at the table while cutting the bread with my hands, I noticed a folded note next to my tray. I took it slowly. I unfolded. The handwriting was that of a student, still insecure. He said, "You taught me more than 3 years of college. Thank you for reminding us all of what it is to truly care." It was not signed, but I knew. It was that dark-skinned inmate who always walked around with books glued to his chest and his eyes downcast. The one who, unlike the others, had stopped to listen to me when I entered the reception days before. The atmosphere of the hospital began to change slowly. It wasn't magic. It was as if a window had been opened in a stuffy room. The air began to circulate. Conversations arose in the corners, softer. Doctors greeted patients with the name. Nurses spent more time at bedside. And most unexpectedly, Dr. Whitaker himself began to conduct meetings in the smaller auditorium. I saw a handwritten poster on the wall. Ethical discussion, empathy and human service. I went once without saying anything. I sat at the back, I heard everything. And at the end, as the people left, he saw me. He only nodded his head respectfully. No show. There were people who tried to interview me. A newspaper reporter showed up at the front desk. I wanted my story. He said, "That was news." I thanked him, but I refused. It wasn't fame I was looking for. I just wanted my daughter alive. And a little dignity on the way, nothing more. I continued there, in the discreet routine, bringing tea to Emily, talking quietly with the inmates, helping a gentleman find the right elevator. And this was spreading. My name became a whisper in the corridors. Mr. James, the father of the strong girl, the man with the canvas bag. I heard everything, but he didn't let it go to his head. I just thought that maybe, just maybe, the world still had a way. But it was at the end of that week, on a calm Friday afternoon, that a nurse pulled me away, his eyes downcast, his speech restrained. "Mr. James, there is one thing you need to know. Something that is not right in Emily's medical record. Something that maybe you never imagined." I froze, because at that moment I understood. That buzz, that discomfort that wouldn't let go, was about to make a name. And the name came from the record room. The next morning, I returned to the hospital with a heavy heart. That conversation with the nurse kept in my head. She had said that there was something strange in Emily's medical record, something that did not match the system's records. Her voice trembled. "Perhaps you need to talk to Dr. Whitaker. There is something there that only he can explain." I walked the corridors like someone carrying lead in my shoes. With each step, I remembered my daughter's face, smiling, weak, but full of light. I couldn't allow anything to dirty that miracle. When I met the doctor, he was sitting alone in the cafeteria, a notebook open in front of him, but his gaze lost outside. In the inner courtyard of the hospital, I approached slowly. He saw me, pulled up the chair next to me and said, "I was going to look for you." His voice was no longer the same. There was no poise, no arrogance. It was just a man, tired of his own armor. We were silent for a while until he closed the notebook with both hands and took a deep breath. "Last night I cried, Mr. James. I cried like I hadn't done since I was a teenager." I didn't say anything. I just let him continue. "My father died at the age of 53, acute infarction. He worked as a gardener in Newton. He never had health insurance. On the day he felt the pain in his chest, they took him to the public hospital. He spent 4 hours waiting at the triage. When they finally took him away, it was too late." His voice began to fail. "At the time, I was 19 years old, and I swore to myself that I was going to be a doctor, but to never depend on anyone again, to go up, and on the way, I buried everything. I buried the anger, the pain, the memory." He paused, looked me in the eyes. "But you dug it all up with a canvas bag and a sick daughter. And I had to remember who I was." That confession fell on me like mute thunder. I saw, there in front of me, the man behind the lab coat, not the director, not the surgeon, but the orphaned son of a system that he himself came to serve. And at that moment, I realized that sometimes even the executioners have their scars. "Doctor," I said, "it's no shame to weep for the one we've lost. Shame is forgetting." He nodded with moist eyes. "I want to change that, Mr. James. I'm organizing a program here at the hospital. Free emergency care for patients in critical situations without insurance. I've already spoken to the board. There will be resistance, but I'm ready, because I don't want to be remembered as the man who turned his back on those who need it most. I want to be remembered as the man who woke up on time." He took the notebook, showed me the first notes. "And this here, it only began because of the Lord." I looked at that notebook full of scribbles, dates, ideas, and I felt that something had worked out. Not only surgery, not only Emily's recovery, but something bigger. Because when transformation begins within the heart of those who once mocked pain, it is a sign that some crack has turned into light. And look, there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. If this story touched you in any way, like this video, and subscribe here to the channel. Let's make this thread of hope reach those who most need to hear that the world can still change. Yes, sometimes it starts with a gesture. Sometimes it starts with listening to those who no one listens to. That day, I left the hospital lighter. Not because everything was solved, but because the biggest wound, the one that no one sees, had finally begun to heal. But just when I thought the surprises were over, Emily called me into the room, envelope in hand, and what she gave me there, it was going to change everything again. She called me with that voice that was still weak, but full of something I hadn't heard in a long time. Decision. "Dad, sit here. I need to show you something." I sat by the bedside as I had so many times before, thinking it was another exam, another prescription, but it wasn't. It was an envelope, half crumpled, with my name written by hand. Inside, a letter and a printed sheet of Boston Community College. Emily had enrolled in the nursing course. "I decided, Dad. I want to be on the side that cares. I want to give back to the world what I received, but this time, with intention." I stared at her, not knowing what to say. The same silence as before, which once weighed him down, was now full of gratitude. The letter that came with it was hers, a small text written during the night. He said that the experience of surgery, humiliation, turnaround, all that had planted a seed in her. "You can't go through all this and go back to being just a patient, Dad. I want to be a bridge between those who suffer and those who can help." We started walking together, again, this time in the physiotherapy rooms, in the follow-up offices. In the first days of college, she limped at first, but her gaze was firm. I went with her almost everywhere, sometimes carrying books, sometimes just watching from afar, across the street. And with each step of her, it seemed that my past was also walking. Every class she took, every test, every appointment. It was as if I cleaned up another piece of that pain that I had been carrying for decades. One day, when she was already in the 3rd month of the course, she called me for a different visit. "Dad, we're going back there, at Boston General." My heart froze. That hospital that had put her on a waiting list, that had said no forecast, that had given up on her before even trying. "But why, daughter?" she smiled. "Because they called me to give a lecture about empathy, about listening, and about what happens when the system forgets that behind every medical record there is a story." Entering that hospital was like going back in time. The same hallways, the same worn paint, the same uncomfortable chairs. But this time, we were not invisible. We were greeted at the door by a team of volunteers. Emily climbed onto the small makeshift stage and spoke for nearly an hour. He told about the pain, the fear, the waiting, but he also spoke of the turn, of the strength he found in his father's silence, of the light that sprouted even in the darkest place. When it was over, there were people crying, nurses, doctors, even a gentleman in a grey suit who looked like part of the board. At the end of the lecture, a young resident came up to me and said, "You're her father, aren't you? I heard your story. It changed my way of seeing patients. Today I listen more. Thank you for existing." I just shook his hand, and I thought, look what we planted. Look at what that old bag has been, that lonely step towards the marble hospital. Sometimes the greatest revolution begins in silence. And if you've stayed with me so far, let me tell you something with an open heart. There's still more. Because what came next, it was a gift that even I didn't know I deserved. So stay here with me. You need to hear what she did on graduation day. That, he dismantled me in one piece. Time passed. Emily was already walking steadily, and the dark circles under her eyes had given way to a serene glow on her face. College went on, and I, even with my knees creaking and my body asking for more pause than step, went with her whenever I could. But that fall, as red leaves covered the sidewalks of Dorchester, I received a different envelope. It came in the mail, without a signature, just the St. Gregory letterhead in the upper corner. I opened it slowly, as if fearing to find another bureaucratic coldness inside. But no, it was a letter, an open letter, with my name at the top. Every life deserves respect. We learned this from a man named James. My eyes got teary. I read and reread, not because I doubted it, but because for so many years I was invisible in that building. And now, my story was hanging on the walls of that hospital. The letter was just the beginning. The following week, I saw on television an article about the new program launched by the hospital. They called it the Dignity Line. Every Wednesday, uninsured patients were treated free of charge by a team trained not only to take care of the body, but to listen, to look into the eyes. I saw the reception, once cold as granite, now full of panels with welcoming messages, background music, and, amazingly, sincere smiles. At the heart of it all, the same employee who laughed at me that morning. She was the one who now coordinated an internal course in empathetic communication. In the interview, they said that she had been one of the first to apologize, and that since that day, he decided to relearn the way to relate to people. The hospital has changed because we have changed, she said, her eyes downcast. I sat there in the armchair in the living room, the letter in my lap, the television still on, and let a tear flow without shame. It wasn't vanity, it wasn't pride, it was just relief. Because the world can be cruel, but it can also learn, and when you learn, it changes. The news began to spread. The Boston newspaper ran a story with the headline, "From the ground to the top, the man who reminded a hospital of his soul." Other hospitals began to ask, visit, copy the model, not because of a fad, but because they understood that something there had been real. It had been fair, and real justice. You can't ignore it. One day, returning from the market, I found a girl in a nursing technician's uniform at the gate of my house. "Sorry to bother, are you Mr. James?" I nodded. She smiled. "I'm from Cambridge Hospital. I saw your story. We are setting up a project similar to the Dignity Line there. And you are our inspiration." I didn't know what to say. I just offered him a glass of water and asked him to sit down for a while. We talked for an hour, and in the end, she hugged me like someone hugging an old acquaintance. And look, if everything had stopped there, I would already be satisfied. But it's like I always say, good, when it's real, doesn't stop. It passes from hand to hand like burning wood, and in the midst of this simmer, the invitation came that would change everything once again, an invitation that came from a place where I never imagined setting foot. You'll understand what I mean, because even I trembled when I read what that paper said. On that morning of clear skies and icy wind, I left without a certain destination. I put on my thick coat, the usual faded cap, and walked to the park that was about 4 blocks from here. It was one of those days when the city seems slower, more listenable. The dry leaves made a pleasant noise under my feet, as if every step I took talked to the ground. I sat on an old wooden bench, a little crooked, but which I held firm. I closed my eyes for a few minutes and just breathed. The smell of autumn has something melancholy, but also renewal. It's time saying that everything changes, that everything falls to make room for what comes after. I took with me a folded paper in my pocket, one that I kept for months, written in shaky handwriting on a difficult night. It was a letter. I never sent it, but I wrote it as if it were. It was addressed to Dr. Whitaker. I wrote before Emily's surgery, that night when faith and fear slept in the same bed with me. He said, "If you listen to me, you will change. If not, I'll know I've done my part." I kept that letter without waiting for a response. It was just to record what my heart needed to say, but life responded even without me giving it away. He listened. He has changed. I sat there for a long time, watching the dry branches against the clear blue sky. Children played further away. A lady was passing by with her dog in sweatshirts. People coming and going, unaware that on that bench was a man who had cleaned bathrooms for 40 years, carried silence like a second skin, and even so, a system had changed. It's funny to think about it. I never screamed. I never imposed myself on the slap, nor on harsh words. I just insisted on existing, and sometimes existing with dignity in a world that tries to erase us is already an act of revolution. No, there was a time when my silence was invisibility. When I passed through the corridors of the hospital, no one saw it, no one greeted him. But now silence is presence, it's strength, it's choice. I learned that we don't need to be noise to be heard. It needs to be true. Is that it? And that's why I sat there on that bench and let time pass me by without haste. Because maybe my mission was this, to teach what no one wanted to learn. And as much as everything seemed to fall into place now, there was still one last piece of this puzzle. A surprise that even I was not prepared to receive, because life, when it wants to teach until the end, always keeps an ending of the kind that makes us hold our breath. Do you want to know what was in that envelope that they handed me after that day in the park? What was written there made me cry, as I hadn't cried in a long time, and it changed the course of my days. Once again, last week I returned to St. Gregory. This time not with a trembling soul or hands loaded with wads of money. I came back light. I wanted to surprise Emily, who now works there as a volunteer. I entered the same corridors where I was once laughed at, but that day I was greeted with different smiles, smiles of recognition, of gratitude. In the main hall, I saw a new sign hanging above the door of the old auditorium, Jameson Auditorium, in honor of those who taught us to heal with dignity. I stood still. The words took a long time to fit in my chest. A new nurse approached. She must have been in her early 20s. He looked at me fondly and asked, "Is it true that you cleaned here?" I smiled. "Yes, my daughter." And it was by cleaning that I learned to listen. She held my hand and said, "Thank you for everything." And at that moment, standing there, with my daughter's name on the wall and a young woman's hand on mine, I understood that time can even erase steps. But it never erases what is done with the heart. Emily was in one of the rooms, advising new patients, head held high, gaze calm, step firm. I saw in her the flame that I burned my whole life to keep burning. I saw my wife in the way she welcomed, in the sweet tone of voice, in the patience with those who suffer. I thought to myself, I was invisible for 40 years. It only took one gesture for them to see me. But I never did it for myself. I did it for her. Today, I continue to walk slowly, with my knees stubborn and my silence intact, but I carry within me something that neither time, nor contempt, nor humiliation have been able to steal, the certainty that it was worth it. Because we don't live to be applauded. We live to transform. If I can leave one thing for you who have come this far with me, it is this. Never underestimate the value of your presence in the world. You may be silent, you may be forgotten, but if your intention is just, one day it blooms. We teach even when we think we're just cleaning the floor. And in the end, that's what remains, the love that we plant in the other. Thank you for listening to my outburst until the end. You who stayed here with me, even without knowing me, kept me company on this crossing. If this piece of my life can be like a hug for another tired heart, enjoy this video. This helps the channel to continue. And if you want to come back for another coffee, sign up too. This little corner here is for stories that television doesn't tell, but that our hearts need to hear. Write here in the comments of which city you are watching. It's too good to feel that there are people scattered around this world with similar souls. And it activates the bell, see? That way you don't lose when the coffee is brewed again. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.